Fleece Army, if you heard the discourse that me and Alonzo just had prior to Adam hitting record, you guys would have thought we were the greatest podcast ever, dude. So if you haven't noticed by the video, Alonzo, I have Miles Davis tattooed to my right arm. I have his Columbia Records logo.
That's a bit more dedication than I have served.
Than many people. And to be honest with you, I would have gotten a much better tattoo, but I only had $100. Because I had this whole thing dreamed up where I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this thing where it's like the picture of Miles with he's like if you do that famous picture of Miles where he's like kind of like in the shadows and he's going the whisper thing. I was like, that's what I want. I was like, how much is that? They're like, that's about $600. I was like, okay.
What $100 get me?
What $100 get me? And they're like, we can do one of it, like an outline of his trumpet and a note. I was like, okay, let's do that. But I had no idea that you were this huge Miles Davis fan. I mean, when you did the jam a long time ago, you did Public Enemy, which I know you can't really do Miles Davis at the goddamn Comedy Jam, but I mean, tell me, like, just how did this start? So take me through your journey.
So let's back up. I grew up loving jazz, right? And I started out in the 70s in the fusion era, listening to Stanley Clarke, Return to Forever, Weather Report, all of that stuff, Herbie Hancock. And then finding out that they played, you had like Wayne Shorter and Herbie Hancock played with Miles in the 60s, Chick Corea briefly played with Miles, definitely influenced by Miles. So you hear all of this. And then I started listening to Miles in like the early 80s. But here's the thing, I think, when you listen to Miles Davis, for me, okay, I can't speak very
Please.
I didn't get it. You know what I mean?
Neither did I.
I start out listening and everybody talks about, he's a god. He's a god. And I'm listening and I'm like, I don't get it. I mean, he's good. It's interesting, but I'm not hearing that thing. And then I think you just listen to it over and over, and then you get it. Just one day it start like, and since then, I've learned a lot about Miles. I've learned a lot about music. Marcus Miller's a good friend of mine. And I don't know if you know who Marcus is or Marcus's history.
Yeah, he played for the Vancouver Grizzlies. He was a power forward. Marcus Miller with the rebound.
Marcus Miller, and this is what's funny about Marcus. You know Marcus, you just don't know that you know Marcus.
Tell me how I know.
So Marcus started out. I think his first pro gig was when he was 16. When he was 21, he's in New York. He's doing jingles. He's working with Luther Vandross on Luther's first album. By the way, he was Luther's musical director for his entire career. So everything you heard from Luther came from Marcus musically.
Nice.
At 21, and this mind-blowing shit here, Josh. Imagine this. At 21, you're in studio in New York playing some jingle for Fruit Loops or the new, I don't know, Ford commercial. Mm-hmm. And he got a call. And it was Miles Davis to come. Miles wants him in studio. So he goes to see Miles, and he starts playing in Miles's band when he's 21 years old.
Oh, God.
It's by the time he wrote, are you familiar with Tutu?
Oh, come on, dude. I got him tattooed to my arm, bro. What do you think
Marcus wrote Tutu.
Did he really?
And he wrote Tutu when he was about 28. Wow. Now, Josh, I don't know what you were doing when you were 28.
Ketamine.
I wasn't in studio writing an album for Miles Davis.
No, most people aren't. No, I mean, that's the thing about Miles, because him being such a prodigy, he found other prodigies and knew this guy's special. Let's work together.
He looked for people. And like I say, I learned a lot about Miles from Marcus because he had such a close relationship. So what he did was he looked for people like him. In other words, people who, like you said, he saw the prodigy in them. He saw the talent in them, and he saw the willingness. One of the things about Miles that I love, and I learning this about him. So he started out, in bebop. He's with Charlie Parker and all those guys. When he went to New York that's what he wanted to play, right? Dizzy
Yeah.
Gillespie, and he's playing like they do. He's playing fast. He's playing a bunch of notes, and then it hit him like, no, that's not who I am. I'm quieter.
Yes.
And what the musicians say, and you're a musician, so you know this better than I do. But they say it's the space that he left in between the notes.
Mm-hmm.
It's the fact that he took his time and played what he wanted to play that I love. And then the other thing, and this is as a comedian, right? He did it for him. He didn't do it for you. He didn't do it for me. He didn't do it for the audience. The music he played for himself, or he
Yes.
played for the band, or he played, or like we're talking about sketches in Spain, he played with the orchestra. But it was never about I'm gonna dumb it down for them, for the audience. I'm gonna cater to the audience. He catered to the music. So, and as you know, as a comic, you start out trying to make everybody laugh, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're doing dick jokes and you're learning to juggle. You're making fun of fat people, or
Oh, you see my act.
it's
You're just going through everything I do.
right. So you're doing that because it's getting the laugh, but then you realize, like, I got to say what I want to say. You find your own voice on stage and you start talking about what you want to talk about. And it's not that you don't care that they laugh anymore. You know you can make them laugh. So now it's like, what else can I do?
Yeah.
So Miles did all of this bebop stuff, and then he said, okay, well, what can I do? You know,
Cool.
and that I
Birth of the
think is
cool.
when he became, well, I'm not going to say that's when he became Miles Davis, but that's when people started to take notice rather than say, oh, it's somebody else doing Bird or it's somebody else doing Bebop.
Yeah. Oh,
It's like,
bebop and hard bop were all basically what was popular at the time. He didn't invent it, but he was a part of it.
right,
And
he
from
was a
from
part
my
of it.
understanding, when he goes, I want to do my own shit, then you get the birth of the cool,
Exactly.
and then you
And
get
you know what I love about the birth of the cool is you could argue that Miles Davis invented cool. Like you could argue, like, yeah, the birth of the cool, yeah, that was you. You there wasn't cool, and then there was you, and then it was
yeah,
like, oh, this is what cool is,
yeah,
And again, that's the and as a performer, the confidence it takes to step out and do your own thing, right? It
yeah.
is tremendous, especially. And now we look at, again, moving to comedy, you look at a guy like Chappelle, right? Who's on top of the world, who's making millions, they're offering millions more, and he's like, nah, fuck it, I want to do this. And he goes off and does his own thing, and the whole thing shifts with him. The whole thing shifts
Hmm.
like, yeah, we want to hear what you want to do. Well, it was the same thing with Miles, right? And then he did Kind of Blue, and this was recorded in what, like 4 or 5 days, and it
Let
was
me look.
like this is the greatest jazz recording ever, right? This was everything in this record. It's the creativity, man. If you ask me what I love about Miles, what I love about any art, but what Miles had, it was the creativity. It was like, yeah, I'm gonna do it this way.
Well, you know what? To back up what you're saying, because I was going to ask you this later. So the question is, because I love how you said the thing about the space in between, because that is stand up comedy. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not about the joke so much; it's about holding that crowd in the moment and waiting to drop the punchline or waiting to say the next thing. And it really is like a comparison. And maybe it is Chappelle, but what comedian do you feel is probably the most influenced by the style that Miles kind of provided for the universe and through art? Like, who would you
Well, I
say?
have to say, to an extent, I am, and I will tell you, one of the great compliments I get, Josh, and have got is, I work with a lot of jazz guys, right? I do jazz cruises, I host
No,
jazz
I
festivals.
didn't know any of this.
Yeah,
I think
I,
like,
I work with a ton of jazz artists,
yeah,
and when I'm on stage making fun of them, because they there's nothing they love more than me cracking on them, and it's all improv, right? It's all verbal improv, and then they'll be like, "Man, that's jazz." Like you just went up there with one idea, or you saw one guy wearing a hat, or you saw a T-shirt, and then you just went 10 minute. You just did a 10-minute solo on that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So coming from them, that is a great compliment. So I am definitely influenced by jazz. The other thing I like about jazz versus stand up and versus the the big shows and this and that is don't try so hard. You know what I mean? When you're at you look at music, right? When you have a big rock concert or something like that, they're working. You know what I mean? They're like,
Yeah.
we gotta bang, bang, bang. We gotta pound this audience. It's big. There's pyro. There's this or that. When you go to a jazz concert, when you see a jazz artist, they're like, "No, man, don't work so hard. Let it happen.
Hmm.
Just play. Just play." Robert Glasper, if you're familiar with Robert Glasper.
Yeah, you actually, I don't know if you remember, I think we were at JFL and we were talking about jazz, and you
Yeah.
actually gave me a track. You were like, listen to this record. And it's incredible. I remember I have it saved in my phone. I love it.
Right. So Glasper, he does a lot of hip hop stuff. He works with everybody from Kendrick Lamar and all of these guys. He scores movies, but he has a jazz trio.
Hmm.
It's an old school trio, jazz, bass, and drums, and plays some of the most fantastic music. And it's quiet. You know what I mean? It's the talent speaks for itself. That's something I love about jazz when the talent speaks for itself, and you see that with comics. You see some that are there's a lot noise and smoke and mirrors and stuff, and then you see when you get it's like the Cellar, right? You talk about the Cellar. When you get on stage at the Cellar, you got to be funny. You ain't gonna
Yeah.
fool them. You can't fool them. You can fool them for a couple of minutes. You maybe fool them for a set,
Hmm.
but you can't fool them, and you certainly can't fool the comics in the back of the Cellar, right? They hear your shit. They come down the stairs and they're like, "Oh, come on," or
I'm
it's
loving
like,
that. Dude,
"Oh,
I'm loving that now though. I'm loving when I see like Will and Cypher and Eric and I like Frenchie. I just because I've only been there a few weeks, but it's like I actually play off seeing, there was Al Franken in the cut a couple days ago. He
right."
had just gotten off and I was like, oh, I'm following Al Franken. And it's like, I don't know, man. I don't it's the same thing. It's like where it's like it used to intimidate me. Now it's like this beautiful thing where I'm like, all right, let me show you guys. I'm different than y'all. So
You
let me
know
show
when
you
I
my solos.
when I started, man, when I started, my one of my first jobs was doorman at the Laugh Factory, and I would just do spots, right? So I would do spots when people didn't show up. So on any given night, and I'm in comedy 1 2 years, but I'm going on after Dom, after
Yeah.
Damon Wayans,
The
after George,
greats.
and I tell people like the education I got back then just doing that, just getting on stage, because George Lopez told me something that always stayed with me. He said, listen, don't even mention the famous guy. They already know him. You get up there and you do what you do. He's like, you don't have to tell them that was Damon Wayans. They fucking know that was Damon Wayans. Who are you? And that always stayed with me. So again, going into jazz and going into Miles and stuff like that, if I'm in a creative space where I'm just coming out of my head, that to me is the most pure. And I always tell people that the greatest joke is something that's said that is hilarious in that moment, but you won't be able to duplicate it because you were in that moment. This is getting back to what you were talking about,
Yeah.
right? Being in the moment, in the silence. That moment, it was the greatest thing. You may not be able to duplicate it, it may not be something you can write down and do again, but it was in that moment. Well, it was the same way with Miles. Like Miles played with his back to the audience,
I
right?
love that. I
And
love that.
again, I asked Marcus about that, and you know what Miles said? He said, "Who do I want to look at? My band or 10,000 motherfuckers I don't know?"
Yeah, dude. Yeah.
You
I mean,
know,
but
who am
he
I?
also,
Who am I?
but
Who
he
am I
also,
talking to?
but he also moved around because and you talk about space. And I mean, and this is, I'm going to bring this right back to the comedy thing in New York is that, one of the things I've been getting from a lot of the New York comics is like, man, you really utilize your space on stage. It's almost like you went to like, you were what do they call it? Like theater, where they're the acting people,
Right,
thespians. I
right,
utilize the space that I'm given. Whereas people are just standing there because when you move around, especially as a trumpet player, Miles used to move around because he was like, it sounds a little different over here. sounds a little different over there. You know what I mean?
Right, and he was also playing with other musicians. Like he'd walk over to the guitar player and just
yeah.
start playing. This was the thing that always tripped me out. Imagine how intimidating that was to be in his band, especially when you were new. For Miles to come over. Now he's standing in your face playing the trumpet, right? And
Yeah,
you're
yeah, yeah.
supposed to play something back. And you're like, yeah, yeah, you know.
You're just like,
But
don't fuck it
but
up. Don't fuck it up.
but anyone he put on that stage was good enough to hang with that. Now what you're talking about, and again, this is energy, right? This is energy. You are an energy act. You have so you do that. But
Yeah.
then you have guys like me or Tom Papa. You know, Papa doesn't take two steps through
Yeah,
an
no.
entire 1 hour set, but he brings the audience into him. So there's no right or wrong. There's both ways to do it. It depends on your energy. The fake part is, and like in the early 2000s when we were doing Dublins, right, and I was following Dane every week. You know, I used to sit on a stool and do my act, right, and there was nobody who was bigger or had more energy on stage than Dane. And they were like, "You just sit there." It's like, well, what, am I going to try to be Dane Cook? Can you imagine me jumping up
He's so
around?
big.
I said
He's so
the front row would be terrified.
You put your foot through the
Me.
goddamn floor with your weight, dude. You're like 6'9", bro. You're built like a goddamn power forward, bro.
So again, it's about doing. It's it's ultimately it's always about doing your own thing. But that's what takes the courage. That's what, especially with us, man. When Hollywood says you're supposed to be this and you're supposed to be that, bring us this, bring us that, right? It's all formulated. And you see a sitcom, right? Dad is dumb, mom is smart, kids are sassy, little girls smarter than little boys, or whatever. You know what I mean? It's all
Yeah.
formulated shit, right? And then, but if you do your own thing, you bring your own voice. That's the best thing you can do. And in music, Miles did that, and then he did it to himself. You know what I mean? Like, so he did. Like you said, Birth of the Cool, and you look at Kind of Blue, you look at Sketches in Spain, which is the orchestral thing and just beautiful solos and this and that, right? And then 10 years later, Bitches Brew. Like this is a
Which which
complete.
not to cut you off of what you're saying is, and this is what I love about Miles Davis is he knew that Bob, he had to move on from Bob. He does cool. He knew he creates modal. Kind of Blue, biggest jazz record in the history of jazz. I used to play it every wedding I ever DJ'd. During dinner, they would give me a fucking album that had like, you can't take that away. I was like, no, I'm putting on Kind of Blue because I want to hear that. And then, he starts getting into the more like starts getting he starts hanging. I mean, and Adam, correct me if I'm wrong, if you can look all this up, because my knowledge is only to a certain point. And we don't have more to this show. Is from my understanding, he was hanging out with Sly and the Family Stone. He noticed that rock and roll was where it was at. It's all electric. And he goes, well, this jazz thing is dead. I have to move on and create. And he does Bitches Brew. And I mean, what's funny, Alonzo, is because I'm kind of like you, where I grew up, and maybe I didn't catch it at the beginning, but did you say like your family was listening to a lot of jazz, and so it was
Yeah,
kind
I
of in
grew
your
up
childhood?
listening to it. Yeah.
So did I. My dad, 4 freshmen, Miles Davis, Coltrane, Joe Pass. I could go on and on and on. The record collection was thick. And as a little kid, I used to listen to records with my dad. And then I got into heavy metal, Guns N' Roses and stuff like that. And then, as you start getting older, you're like, jazz is lame, man. I'm never listening to that. That's so whack, dude. And I didn't appreciate it or anything. And then in my 20s, I was DJing private parties around DC and Baltimore, and I used to drive around to do shows on the weekend. And you only back in the day, I only had a tape player in my Jeep, and you get tired of the tapes you're listening to, and so you go on the radio, and the radio sucks. DC 101, it's the same 5 songs they play over and over. Like 98 Rock, same 5 songs. Linkin Park, into this, into that. And I remember there was a station called WPFW that, if I'm not mistaken, was the Howard University public radio station. And 89.3. My dad used to listen to it every Sunday when he drove us to Hebrew school. We used to call it the Jazz Mobile. And I remember I was like, I'm going to put on 89.3 because they were doing something around Miles's birthday. And I started listening to it. And this is a 21-year-old kid. I mean, 21, you're a baby that's listening to hard rock, grunge, going to raves, doing all just. And I remember it like it suddenly just went boom. And then that was it. And then I just became obsessed. And I bought Birth of the Cool immediately. I had Sketches of Spain because my dad had this record and I'd listened to it. But then I went immediately to, I got to listen to Bitches Brew. That's the one that I know is going to be cool, which, I mean, I don't know how you feel because we're going to start getting the specifics of the stuff he did with Gil Evans in a second. But like, how does Bitches Brew play into the full your love for jazz, and how do you appreciate something like that as compared to something as like this?
So from what I understand with Bitches Brew, it's kind of what you said. He was listening to Sly Stone. You know, James Brown was big. Funk was just starting out, but the other thing was the electronic instruments.
Yeah.
You know, there were electric keyboards and this and that, right? And Miles, like, it was something new. It was like, okay, let's get these electric instruments, you know. And you got Herbie Hancock in the band back then, and Wayne Shorter, who is, if you ever listen to Wayne Shorter on the saxophone, I've heard saxophone players be like, yeah, Wayne is in a different category. What Wayne does is like nobody else can do what Wayne does, you know, with a saxophone. You know, it just so Miles, once again, he was like, okay, so this is this new thing, this electronic sound, this funk, this soul, but he still incorporated it all in jazz because he wasn't trying to write a hit record. He wasn't playing, you know what I mean? Like there's a different. He was still doing him, and I heard a great story about, and I think it was Columbia or CBS, whatever record company he was with at the time, and the guy said, you know, Miles has a new album, and they were like, great, and they said, but he wants to call it Bitches Brew. Now think about this is 1970, right? We ain't calling things bitches publicly, and they said,
and cold brew hadn't even been invented yet until years later.
Like, so they said he wants to call it Bitches Brew, and they were like, okay. Because who's going to argue with Miles Davis, right? Who's going to say, no, Miles, you have to call it something else, right? You don't get to do that. You know, he famously changed the cover of an album from a white woman to a black woman because he was like, that's, you know.
And I think there's titties on the cover, too.
Yeah. He's
titties.
He knew who he was.
Yeah.
He knew who he was. And this is something that record was completely new, and that record led to the fusion era of the 70s, like I say, when we had, you know, Chick Corea and Return to Forever and Weather Report and John McLaughlin and all of this fusion stuff. He kind of opened that door where now the musicians were like, okay, we're gonna do electric music. We're gonna just play. You know, my aunt Altanese, may she rest in peace, was a huge jazz lover and ran a jazz appreciation club in San Francisco and this and that. And she was from that school of, if you plug it in, it's not jazz, right?
A lot of people believe that. Yeah, a lot of people don't think once it goes electric, it's not jazz. But as long as it's improvisation, I took history of jazz in college, bro. As long as it's improvisation, because you could say that who's the guy that everybody loves? Oh, Frank Zappa could be jazz. There's so much. So
you know, and George Duke, who was a brilliant musician of all types, but definitely jazz, he played in Zappa's band in the 70s, you know. But these guys, this era, once again, Miles was leading the pack, you know. And when Miles died, a lot of people don't know, he had started playing hip hop. He had started, I should say, playing with hip hop.
It's definitely in the sound of it, because I mean that was popular in the time, I think, that he was doing, but that's what he did. Dude, this is why I love Miles, and this is why I like a comic like Dave Chappelle, and this is why I love a band like the Beatles and Radiohead, is because the purpose of being an artist is you start with your intro. This is how I'm introducing myself to the world. Let's do the Beatles just for argument's sake. I come in, she loves you, I want to hold your hand. It's the most candy pop, Brit pop shit you're ever going to hear in your life. And then what do? They go, all right, well, we're going to start getting into, a little bit more, like Help and some other songs that are a little bit away from that, still in that vein. And then it's like, okay, well, the world is turning into folk music. Then we're going to do Rubber Soul. And now it's going to psychedelic. So let's really go out there and venture into uncharted territories, and we create Sergeant Pepper and Magical Mystery Tour, and it's just evolution. Radiohead started with Creep, and if you listen to their last 3 records, it is nothing like Creep, and that's what Miles did. It's like you got to push yourself, and even if it fails, you at least tried something different. That's why there's so many bands. I'm not going to name names, the Killers, but there's a lot of bands out there that keep making the same album over and over again. And I think that's what's beautiful. And I think that's why I love someone like Chappelle. And I love, he's so, and even Burr, it's like they're just so different because they have a style, and it just keeps evolving, and they push deeper, and next thing you know, they're saying something more than just a regular joke about a man and a woman in a relationship. They're saying something about society. And Miles's music, it kind of was the evolution of what was going on. I mean, Bitches Brew could be a reaction to what was happening in the world in the 70s.
Yeah, well, it was the late '60s, right? So you had the civil rights movement. You had Vietnam, right? You had the I don't know, free love hippie world, whatever you want to call it, that going on. The sexual revolution beginning, which Miles' sexual revolution kind of lasted a while, but he had some phenomenal women in his life. But anyway. Yeah, all of that played into his music. All of that played into Bitches Brew because it was this is something new, and there was a little anger, right? Because in society, in the '60s, in the late '60s, society was getting angry. They were, it was that whole anti-establishment vibe, right? That whole anti-establishment vibe. Even look at the clothes he wore. Look at the clothes. He went from being a jazz artist, wearing a suit, wearing nice clothes, to this or that, to suddenly wearing getting into the whole bell bottoms, leather thing. And there was a woman he was with, and I don't remember her name, but she was a young woman, and she was the one who was like, you got to change your style. You got to start dressing like people dress now. And so he went from that button down professional jazz look, like jazz musician, go on stage, to his style. So everything changed. It takes a risk to be willing to make that change, especially when you're established. When you talk about bands doing the same music, one of the things is, well, their fans expect it, and there was a story I heard once about Bono telling someone in U2, like, wait, it sounds the same, and the guys was like, yeah, because we're U2, like this is how we sound. You know what I mean? Like this is U2. This is how we sound. You look at the Police, right? The Police, phenomenal band, but like you said, the records, they all had that kind of rock reggae vibe to them, right? It changed, and then when Sting decided he wanted to do his own thing, what did he do? He went out and got 5 jazz musicians and said, I'm going to go solo with these guys, and that was a different sound, and he went in a different way with that. So, but again, man, there's a security to doing the same thing, and when you're famous, there's a financial security to doing it. So so it takes some courage to step out of that. But I think Miles, he had to, just because he was so creative, he couldn't do the same thing. He couldn't do another kind of blue.
No, he couldn't. Let's talk about this record, because this is the one we're talking about. But this is such an interesting album, especially if you only know, because most people only really know Kind of Blue or Bitches Brew, which are like the 2 biggest records. like how does this record make you feel? When did you first hear this record? Let's take me there. Let's start there. When did you
Well,
first hear this
I
album?
don't. Again, I will tell you, it had to be in the '80s because that's when I was learning. Right, that's when I'm learning, and you hear one Miles thing and you get it, and then you're like, oh, let me get this, let me get that. Obviously, the big difference is the orchestra. He's not playing with a quartet or a quintet. He's playing with an orchestra, and that's so that now that's a whole different backing. Okay, and again, I'm not a musician, so I don't know how to put it into musical terms. But an orchestra, what kind of dog is that?
Doberman, like a
Oh, cool.
dog. You see her?
Yeah,
Hi,
yeah.
I'm
I got a,
like a dog.
I got Hulk. I got a Great Dane puppy. He's sleeping right behind me.
Oh my god, that thing's gonna be
But
massive, bro.
yeah, but the orchestra, now you have a sound that fills the room, fills the space, right? And then him doing his solo on the horn, it's beautiful. And again, I keep coming back to this word, but it's quiet because he has them backing him, but he's not trying to be bigger than them. He's playing
Yeah,
his thing. You know what I mean?
well said.
He's not trying to play louder. Like if like you know who Maynard Ferguson is, right? Do you
I
know who
do.
Maynard
Yeah.
Ferguson?
Hmm.
So when Maynard Ferguson plays a trumpet, he's playing loud. He's
Yeah.
playing loud, and he'll have the orchestra behind him. Like I remember he did the theme from Rocky once, and he's blowing. His face was probably purple and this and that. Like Miles never blew that hard. Quiet. He's like, you listen to me. I don't play to you. You listen to me. So now it's just a bigger thing with the orchestra, makes the whole sound bigger, but he's still doing him in front of it.
No, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. I listened to, like I said, I listened to this with my dad um years ago, man. I mean, fuck. It was like my dad didn't have a lot of Miles records, but he had this one because he had Porgy and Bess too. He
Hmm.
had the other Gil Evans record. And listening to it back then, it was like, this isn't the Miles I thought it was going to be because it is that bigger sound. It is the orchestra. Um, and it's one that just never really made its way into my regular Miles rotation. Every once in a while, maybe I would put it on because I want to hear the first song. Because I mean, the first song, I'm gonna fuck it up. Concerto de Aranjuez. God, I'm white. Adagio, which is 16 minutes of the record, is so beautiful. And that's, in my opinion, that's the whole record. That
Yeah.
16-minute song is the whole record. The first
Hmm.
4 minutes of it are some of the most beautiful music Miles might have ever done, in my opinion. And so I put it away, Alonzo. I put it away for years. And then, of course, it's coming up on the podcast. We're getting ready to do this. And then I moved to New York, which I can't shut up about. Everybody, Fleece Army won't tell me that's all I talk about, but I'm excited. I love it here. And there is something about music to image. And to walk around this city, walk on the East River, which is what I've been doing with the dog, and listening to this on some really good headphones. I cannot stress enough to every person that listens to this podcast, get some good headphones, put this record on, and go to a walk, whether it's in a park, whether it's in the city, whether you're in the middle of fucking nowhere in Oklahoma. It creates a mood that brought me to tears. Alonzo, I'm not gonna lie. Like, music really
Yeah.
affects me. Especially that first song. It's like, it's there's some really beautiful moments in this, and it just crushed me. And maybe it's just with everything that's going on, and the move is very stressful, or maybe it is just, this is such a beautiful city. It's such a beautiful record that it touched me so much. Um, that
Let
that
me.
this. That, you go ahead.
First of all, I love what you said about the headphones because my girl will listen to music through her phone. like with just the phone speakers, and I'm like, how can you, you know? And I
Blasphemy.
have like the portable Bose speaker, and I'm like, at least use this. If you're not going to turn on the system, at least just use this. But how? How
Yeah.
can you listen to it through a phone, right? And then what you said, you when you put on good headphones, you hear things that you don't hear through anything else, right? You don't even a great sound system or whatever. You hear the subtleties in the phones that you don't hear
Yeah.
anywhere else. So that
Two
there is a
phones.
beauty to that. Now you might not want to get hit by a car, so you may not want to
You
have
stay
the
on the
built-in
sidewalk.
sound.
Stay on the sidewalk at least, and be aware of your surroundings,
Listen, like I
people.
said, you may not want to get hit by a car. Welcome to New York, Josh. You think the
Yeah.
sidewalk's going to protect you?
I mean, I've dodged some things so
But
far. I mean, I've seen a lot of crazy people. Trust me, dude. I lived in Baltimore and Washington D.C.
yeah,
Besides here in L.A., you have to be aware of your surroundings
yeah.
when you
I
have
mean,
noise
I
cancellation headphones
like
on.
Pan Piper also, just because Pan Piper has a melody,
Yes.
has a melody to it. But when you're listening to this, when you're listening to any of this, and again, this is what I said about Miles, where you listen repeatedly to something, and then you hear something you didn't hear before, and then suddenly you just get it. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Just like um, let's go back to Kind of Blue, right? Because that's the biggest one. When you listen to all blues, right? And everybody seems to talk about So What, and they love So What, and it's a great track. But all blues, to me, it's just that repetitive, just doo, doo, doo. And it's like they're not trying. They're not trying. And then it's like you play something and then you come back to it, and it just stays right here, and I was trying to explain that to my girl, like listen to it, because she listens to a lot more pop music and hip hop and stuff like that, and I'm the old guy who listens to jazz a lot. But I was like, just they're right here, and they don't feel the need to go anywhere else from that. Just solos, individual, but the overall vibe of the song stays right there. And like you said, when you do 16 minutes, like they had no problem playing a 16-minute track or a 15-minute track, or sometimes 20 minutes. I mean, there were records where the whole side one was one song.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, Jack Johnson, that record. I think it's called "The
Yeah,
Ballad of Jack Johnson." I mean, that's just there's two songs or maybe four songs on the whole record, if I'm not
right.
mistaken. Um,
And
well,
and
here,
here's and
go
here's
ahead.
the thing, because you talk, we all saw the Queen movie, right? When they did Bohemian Rhapsody, and
Yeah.
you have the record exec saying 6 minutes. Nobody's gonna listen to a song for 6 minutes. I don't think there was any record executive that said to Miles Davis, that's too long.
Yeah. Now, do you? First of all, you can't say anything, Miles. He's a fucking king, dude. Dude, kind of
That's
blue. You brought up kind of blue. Like, I mean, my favorite song, maybe one in my top five songs ever made is Flamenco Sketches, and I'm
mhm.
checking right now to see how long it is. I mean, that's a 9.5 minute song, and I don't want it to end. I don't want it to
Yeah.
end. Just like I didn't want. They could. I'm telling you, they could have done this first. They could have done and I agree. The Pan Piper, incredible. I love the ending. I love Solea, if that's how you pronounce it. It's all good. It all equals just one track. There is a part I think in Sayeta where it's only breaks into like an army thing. The
Hmm.
dun 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 dun
Yeah.
dun 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 dun. If Adam, I would have had you pick tracks out if I wasn't dicking around all day setting up this fucking equipment. But I did a good job. Do I sound better, everybody? Lecca?
Sound great.
Yeah. Thank you, buddy. Um, length of a song means nothing. If they're taking you on a journey, which Miles does, and he creates the mood, sometimes the song needs to be 36 minutes long. You know what I mean? If that's what he wants to do, and that's the art that he wants to create, each and every one of these parts and sections of this record all makes sense. And what's great is that he's got a full catalog of other music that has shorter songs. I mean, some of the stuff off of Kind of Blue, very short. I mean, Miles Runs the Voodoo Down, if I'm not mistaken, off of Bitches Brew, might be one of the fuck. I might be wrong. It might be 16 minutes, or it also might be 6 minutes. but there's some tracks on Bitches Brew that are super long and there's some that are super short. It's just whatever he feels necessary is what he's going to do. Just like, let's bring it back to comedy. When you're writing a joke, sometimes, dude, right now, what I love doing in New York is I have these jokes where I used to add all this exposition just to get to this punchline. And then I was like, you watch all these other dudes that are just set up, punch, set up, punch. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do what Louis did, go right to the punch. And then just add more from that punch, but get to that punch as quickly as possible.
Yeah, get to the punch and then tag it.
And then sometimes when you're telling a story, the story's longer and the punches at the end, you have to add the exposition. And I feel this record and a lot of Miles's records are a journey. They're a journey, and because there's one concrete, vibe through the whole thing.
And again, to make the comparison to Chappelle, when Dave did the special in Austin, right, a couple of years ago, and when he told the story of Emmett Till, do you remember this? He talked about Emmett Till was a black kid who was accused of whistling at a white woman, and they beat him to death and threw him in the river. And his mother, when they found the body, he's from Chicago, he was in Mississippi visiting relatives and stuff, and his mother said, no, keep the casket open because they need to see what they did to my child, right? So it's one of the most painful stories in black history, but it was also one of the sparks for the civil rights movement because it showed how truly cruel they were, etc. So getting to what your point of telling a story. So Dave told this story during his comedy hour, and then it led into something funny. Not Emmett Till, but he led it into something fun. And you're like, do you know how brave that is and how insane that is to tell a story that serious and that sad in the midst of a comedy special? But he needed to do it because of the arc of the special, because of the arc of the storytelling. And it's the same way with a track. When you do a track like I was just looking at it, In a Silent Way.
Yeah, I love that so much.
That's a 20-minute song, and there are parts of it where it is silent, where it's just but it's 20 minutes. It's him and Wayne Shorter basically having a conversation and then letting us listen.
Yes.
But it's 20 minutes, and they didn't feel a need to rush it. And like you said, in comedy, sometimes you have setup punch, and I'm more of a setup punch guy and this and that. But then there are stories. Recently, I've been telling the story of Charlie Case on stage, and Charlie Case was a vaudeville guy who became, a lot of people say, the first stand-up comedian because he just stopped doing all the vaudeville. He stopped the blackface and the costumes and the singing and dancing, and he just stood up there on stage and told a story that was funny. And he used to swing his arm for emphasis, and that became the punchline. Like, that's where punchline comes from this guy Charlie Case swinging his arm for emphasis in a story. And the story is powerful, and it impacts me because this is where stand-up came from. And as a black person, he stepped out of the blackface and all of that shit that you had to do in the late 1800s, early 1900s just to be black and get on stage. So it's an impactful story, but it's a story worth telling. So like you said, where you have sometimes where you're telling a story and you're just putting a lot of decorative words in and painting a picture and this and that, but you don't need it. You can just get to the punchline. But then there are other pieces, other stories, other bits, whatever you want to call it, that you do have to tell the entire story for it to work, So, and I think it was the same thing musically, but then you also have in jazz, because there's so much improvisation, I have Miles playing Time After Time by Cyndi Lauper.
I know, I love that.
For 3.5 minutes, and I have him playing it for 12 minutes. On his live record, it's like a 12 or, I don't know, 15-minute, whatever it is, because he's with a live band, he's doing a show, and they're improvising and they're playing with it. And like you said, when he's getting in the face of the guitar player, and the guitar player has to step up or whatever. So And this is what I was talking about the beauty of jazz and the beauty of comedy is what happens
Mm-hmm.
in the moment on stage. And as you know, you can do the same bit, but then one day you do it and some other things come to you and you're like, that's it. Or you can have, I don't know if you've had this experience. I've had this experience where I couldn't make something funny for a year. I had the idea and I knew there was something funny, but I couldn't make it work. And then suddenly something hit and it was like, that's the joke. That's the
Yeah,
joke.
dude. Yeah. Oh, I mean, I remember we were keep talking about Chappelle, but he did a Q&A once at the Comedy Store after like a 3-hour set, and we were all there as open micers, and he was asking a question, and Rel Battle asked a question about what if you got a premise and you got a joke that you know is funny, but you just can't make it funny yet. And he goes, you got to hold on to it because maybe you're not ready to tell it yet. You know,
Yeah.
maybe you're not. You need sometimes you need a few years to grow. I think, and that's the same thing that we can throw back to Miles. Is Miles probably wanted to do some some crazier shit, but he was just like as a performer and as where he was at in his career, he was like, this is what I'm at now, and this is what feels right. You
Well,
know.
also what he did was he changed the band.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely got guys that I felt could kind of go with whatever direction he wanted to
Well,
go
no,
to for
what I
sure.
mean is sometimes when he changed the music, he knew he needed new musicians to play it.
Yeah, yeah. That's kind of what I was saying, but I just
Hmm.
you said it way better. All right, for time because you have to be out of here in 10 minutes, right?
Yeah, I
All right, so let's
unfortunately
no 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 no
I
no.
have a
This is
job now, Josh. My day is compressed.
really you started working at a Panera Bread.
I'm on the 4 to 12 shift at the Starbucks. No, I'm doing talk
Oh
radio. I'm doing
oh
a new progressive talk radio station here, and I do the drive time 4 to 7. So I got to prep, and then I got to get down there to the studio, and then be on for three
yeah,
hours,
dude. All right,
Monday
well
to
here
Friday.
let's hit you because I'll promote the shit out of it too, and we'll do it at the end. But let's get some facts, and then we'll get you out of here. Okay. Here we go. All right, these are some random Miles Davis facts. Well, first of all, here, let me do this first fact. This is about, let's just get to the meat and potatoes of this record. Uh, Davis's wife, Frances Davis, insisted he accompany her to a performance of flamenco dancer Roberto Iglesias. Inspired by the performance, Davis bought every flamenco album he could to get at Colony Record Shop in New York City. And then he paired it up with Gil Evans, and they created this record as a program of compositions largely derived from the Spanish folk tradition. So that is how we get Miles Davis into this record. Now, this one is just very random, and I kind of liked it. Miles, among his pre-show rituals, were avoiding food and sex. He was inspired by fighters Joe Louis and Sugar Ray Robinson, so he avoided shaking hands before performances. Um, Also, like a boxer, he tied his shoelaces as tightly as possible on shoes that were one size too small. And Miles does that because he wanted to make himself hungry and unsatisfied.
Uncomfortable. Yeah, a little uncomfortable. Yeah.
I mean, you do
I
any weird
haven't
shit
done
that
that
you
yet. I
do?
don't know. I
No.
don't know if I'd be funnier in smaller shoes, but I get that. And the flamenco thing, that was because he heard a completely new kind of music, right? To
Yeah.
him, like he had never heard anything like that, and now he's like, oh shit, this mind blown,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So
Davis had a throat operation in 1957 to remove nodes from his vocal cords. He was told not to raise his voice for 10 days. 2 days after he was told this, he shouted at someone, either a record company owner or a booking agent. I mean, we have all done that. It's like, according to Davis, it tried to convince me to go into a deal I didn't want and permanently damaging his voice and giving him a rasp, which is going to lead to this story. And then I'm going to get into rapid questions after that because the other facts are just like he had met and talked to a young Philip Seymour Hoffman, how he quit heroin. But let's this is one of my favorite stories. Gerard Carmichael once called me to tell his friends that he was having dinner with this story. So my dad met Miles Davis My dad was in the mid '70s, early '70s. My dad was down from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and staying at the Four Seasons in Washington D.C. on some like conference for whatever my dad did at the time, and he was an accountant. And he gets in the elevator, and there is Miles Davis. Big fucking glasses, the big bug-eye glasses, a fucking boa, a jacket that probably cost $9,000 for 1972, And my dad, huge fan of Miles, and they're on the thing and they're going down, and my dad goes, "Hey, you're Miles Davis, right?" And Miles goes, "Nah, man." My dad's like, "Oh, okay." Of course it's Miles Davis. He knows it's Miles Davis, right? And then they get to the stop where they're both going to get off. And as the door's about to open, my dad looks over at Miles and he goes, "Hey, man, I know you're not Miles Davis, but if you run into Miles Davis, tell him I really dig his music." And Miles takes his glasses, pulls them down to his nose and goes, "Thank you, baby."
Like I said, invented cool.
Invented cool. He invented it. All right, rapid questions, and we're gonna get you out of here. Okay. Favorite song on the record?
I'm gonna go with Pan Piper, the melody.
Okay. Least favorite song on this record?
Tough one. Saleya, but this it's hard to say, but I'll pick that one.
Okay. What song on this record would you fuck to?
Concerto de Adagio, but only for the first about 4 minutes, and then we'll
4 minutes, dude.
The rest of it.
Yeah. That's when you go get some orange juice, rehydrate.
If she catches me at the right time, but definitely she ain't getting the whole record. No.
No, dude. I would probably do I do Will of the Wisp. It's only 3:47. I go in, I go out, I'm done, dude. I can't do no concerto. Come on. Think I got concerto energy? And last question, does this record deserve to be on the 500 greatest albums list, and why?
Ooh, you mean, see, that's a tough one. The only reason I'm going to say no is because of his other records that will be there. Okay, Kinda Blue, Bitches Brew, they're going to be there.
Mm-hmm.
So let's leave room for some other artists.
Okay. You don't think this is his best work?
No, I don't.
You don't think it's even up there in the top 5?
For him?
Yeah.
Yeah, but but again, Kinda Blue, I think is. And people are like, oh, well, that's just the most popular. But it's like, it's the most popular for a reason.
Completely. Yeah, I completely agree with that.
So that one, and then Bitches Brew, again, new generation, completely new type of music. Completely, and Marcus said something to me one time. We were talking about Bitches Brew. And Marcus said, yeah, now imagine smoking weed or dropping acid for the first time and listening to Bitches Brew, right? Because remember, this is 70. This is when that happened. So imagine listening to that. So you got to put that record in the top 500 of all time.
And it is, and so it kind of blues is number 12.
Yeah.
So it's in a place like, and Bitches. Go ahead.
You can argue for Sketches to be there, but again, and the only reason I say it's not. It's like sports, right? It's like how many records does a Michael Jordan have, or LeBron James, or Kobe, or Shaq, or somebody like that? So are you going to put them in all of these categories, or can you just put them there based on one or two? You know what I mean? Like, you could give them the whole record book, but let someone else shine. Like LeBron. Yeah, I don't know if you're a basketball fan at all. I see you got an NBA shirt on.
I'm wearing dude, I have the Washington Wizards logo tattooed to my arm, bro. You think I'm doing that just to let people know I'm from DC?
So I'm going to argue for 7 years, the MVP trophy should have been called MVP other than LeBron.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, you're
they
right.
just couldn't give it to him every year. So it should have been, the MVP other than LeBron is Russell Westbrook. The MVP other than LeBron is KD. But LeBron's carrying a different team to the finals every year. There's really no question who's the greatest basketball player on earth for that era, right?
Yeah.
But they were like, but we can't just hand him the trophy every year. So it's the same thing with Miles. It's like, okay, let's not, we can't put all of his records, or we got to let somebody else in. We got to let some other artists in, right? So if Sketches of Spain is in, now what are we going to do about Herbie Hancock and his early stuff? Where do we put that? You know what I'm saying?
I'm pretty sure. I no, I get it, but I'm pretty sure Watermelon Man's in there.
Yeah, definitely. But
I
but but
you know, it's
but this
not
is
to cut
why
you
I'm
off.
saying
Go ahead.
this is why I'm saying Sketches. I wouldn't put it in the top 500 just because Miles has other entries there, and we want to leave room for some other people.
I respect that 100%. You're actually Adam. Since you've been working here, is he the first person that has actually said no? Right?
Yeah, no, that's the first time someone's like, yeah, and I like the reason because you want to let other
I
people.
do too.
But yeah, this is the
Yeah.
first time that they're like, nah, maybe not.
And by the way, Adam, fucking wearing the Metallica shirt today, dude.
I try to wear a music shirt, even if it doesn't apply to what we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, but I don't know if you know this, but Miles Davis and Kurt Hammett used to jam together, and their kids used to play in pools. I made all that up. Come on, dude, you really fucking think Metallica and Miles? He's like, hey, Kurt Hammett, who is the master of puppets? And it's no, yeah. Alonzo, this was great. Promote away. Anything you want to promote? I know you just mentioned the radio show, but please do it again and tell us everything that you want everybody to know
it's
about.
KBLA 1580, and you can listen to it through KBLA1580.com. It's terrestrial radio in LA, but it's on the internet. Also, AlonzoBodden.com. I'm still touring, man. I'm still banging it. I'm in Colorado this weekend. I have coming up. I'm going to be back on Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me on NPR. I'm co-hosting the O'Hare Jazz Festival outside of Chicago, August 7th and 8th.
Yeah.
So I'll be there. Like I told you, man, that's my vibe because you talk about cool audiences, man. A jazz audience, grown folks who are just like there is a great audience for comedy. Again, you don't have to work so hard. You don't have to yell at them and bang them over the head. You can just hit them with something, and they know what you're talking about. So that stuff is coming up.
Yeah.
And then I'm gonna visit Josh in New York because now
Yeah.
I don't need a hotel. I just crash.
I do.
There's
Wait.
plenty of room because it's completely empty.
Completely empty right now. I got a dog and dude, I was trying to make a riff. Like, do you ever like just in the middle of one of those jazz sets go squeak button city button city just go all Ella on them. Alonzo, this was great, buddy. Thank you so much, man.
Hey man, thanks for having me. And I'm glad we got it to work because schedules were kind of crazy.